All right, folks, good morning and welcome to AOF's final budget webinar of the series. We did it. We have come to the end of the process. Was certainly a long one over the past 6 months, but we are excited here with a fantastic lineup of speakers to share really how some of those major health and human services provisions ended up in the budget, what was in, what's out, and where the fight continues. So I'm Kelsey Bergfeld. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'm the Director of Advocates for Ohio's Future and joined by my colleague, Sarah Hudasek. We are Team AOF. And again, we're excited to be joined by a lot of our partners today to share how the budget ended up. So next slide. So it felt like it took forever to get us to this point, right? Really, we know the state budget process is involved, lots of different versions, lots of opportunity for input for Ohioans, for stakeholders, for different groups to impact that process. We have seen all the different amendment opportunities, all the votes, all the changes that have happened up to this point. And we are done on time, surprisingly even. I know that was in question for a while. So next slide, Sarah. Just wanted to share a few stats about the final version of amended substitute House Bill 33, such a long title. So again, the budget was passed on time by the constitutional deadline of June 30th, came down to those last few hours, but certainly made it. The House voted in favor of the bill 67-30, mostly along party lines, along with the Senate 25-6. So we did know in the House there was a lot of bipartisan support for their version of the budget. The Senate not so much. Lots of changes happened in that conference committee to come to the final vote. The conference committee did vote along party lines 4-2 in favor of passing that conference report. And then Governor DeWine took his executive power to line item veto 44 provisions within that budget. So this means that he can veto or kind of line item strike both funding as well as policy provisions within the budget. We do know that this budget bill is the largest kind of policy document as well as funding document that we'll see this General Assembly. Lots of changes. Again, it is a huge policy document. I know some folks, if you're new to the process, you might think that it's purely fiscal, but that is not the case. As we move through this process, lots of new proposals, some proposals, inserted in at the end of the process without much time for public input or consideration. But that happens at each and every biennium and how kind of the cycle moves forward. Ended up being over 6,000 pages. If you see photos of the governor signing the bill, you will see it in front of him. Stacks and stacks and stacks of paper, tall towers. I hope whoever set those up was very careful and they never got knocked over. Could you imagine? That would be a bad day. And altogether, we saw $95 billion in funds for fiscal year 24 and 25. That is all funds, including GRF for general revenue funds, as well as federal dollars and other streams of revenue coming into the state. So 95 billion per fiscal year, almost 200 billion overall. Certainly a strong budget. I also wanted to provide, when you revisit our slides as well as our webinar later, you are welcome to visit the links. We included a comparison document. So this compares each and every policy kind of proposal per department throughout the entire process. So all the way from what the governor proposed, the House version, the Senate version, and then conference committee. So it's 4 columns, lots of pages, lots of information there if you would like to revisit where a certain policy or proposal ended up and kind of its journey throughout this process. Also wanted to include links to the full bill language as enrolled. So this includes governor's vetoes, and then we also have the full veto message if you would like to revisit. So folks, just a few housekeeping rules as we continue. Just a reminder, this webinar is recorded. We'll send it to each and every person who registered to join us today. We'll send the recording as well as those slides will also be available at our website at advocatesforohio.org. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our first speaker, Beth Kowalczyk from the Ohio Association of Area Agencies on Aging, or O4A, to share with us her budget priorities, how things landed, and then what might need some extra advocacy in the next few months. So Beth, whenever you're ready, Take it away.
Thank you so much, Kelsey, and thank you to Advocates for Ohio's Future for everything you've done on this budget and working to build a strong coalition that really enabled us to get some good things in this budget, and to fight some things that maybe aren't so good. Yes, I'm Beth Kowalczyk. I'm the Chief Policy Officer for the Ohio Association of Area Agencies on Aging. We support the 12 area agencies on aging in Ohio that provide services and support to enable older adults to thrive in their communities as they age. We had budget priorities for this budget that were really focused on building the capacity of home and community-based services, and particularly some specific services that are really have been underfunded and needed more support. So we can go to the next slide. Our first budget priority was equal access to home care. In the aging space, in the Passport, Medicaid, HCBS waiver, and in MyCare Ohio, we have seen, and frankly, across our other non-Medicaid programs, we have seen a drastic shortage of workers to support home care for older adults. And one of the primary reasons that is because the rates are so low in terms of supporting providers and workers. And workers are being paid a wage of about $10 to $12 an hour in these waivers. And so we advocated to support equal access to home care for older adults. Other programs may be paying more in terms of wages. And so we have seen that in our space, we have people waiting months to up to a year for home care. So that was our top priority. And then we had other priorities. So you can go to the next slide. And that's supporting older adults and community with a myriad of services that need state support. And that includes adult day, non-Medicaid funds through senior community services and healthy aging grants, the assisted living waiver, rate increases. Affordable housing is critically important because you can't thrive in your home and community if you do not have affordable housing, and home modifications enable you to stay in your home. Adult protective services, and then expansion of a program that is become pretty popular across the country called Program for All-Inclusive Care of the Elderly. And that program actually got expanded in a previous bill, and we just wanted to support any other things that might have occurred through the budget through that program. So we can go to the next slide, because I'm happy to say that with our priorities and our advocacy and our working with coalitions and our area agencies on aging doing the good work they do in advocacy, we got quite a few of those things in the budget. I feel pretty good about how older adults are going to be supported. The first thing was an initiative by the Department of Aging, and that is something called Healthy Aging Grants. This is a one-time $40 million AARP program, American Rescue Plan Act funds, that'll be provided in 2024 to counties through county commissioners. And so each county will have an allocation of funding to provide services such as home modifications, that could support meal programs and other types of services, and perhaps some innovations that counties can do. And I know our area agencies on aging are eager to support the counties in that initiative. Next slide, please. Other local funding that we have been advocating for years, it was severely cut during the recession and it's slowly been building back up, is senior community services. This is a pot of flexible state funds that enables us to draw down Older Americans Act dollars. It's maintenance of effort. And also during the distribution of Older Americans Act AARP dollars, the state was required to have a match. So some of these funds can be used for that as well. We did see a small increase. The governor had proposed a larger increase, $12.8 million per year, to be distributed through the area agencies on aging, which would be a significant increase from the $9.7 million that we currently have in the current budget. Through the budget process, that number was reduced. So we are seeing an increase, but it's a much smaller increase of about $500,000 in 2024 and about $1 million in 2025. There's also an earmark for a senior transportation pilot program in Cuyahoga County And there was this little blip where the Senate removed the spending authority language. And fortunately, we were able to get that back in over conference committee, because if you don't have the authority to spend the dollars through the language, then it just kind of sits there and we have to figure out what to do. So that's all good. And that's good that we've gotten that increase. Next slide, please. And other things that were proposed actually by the governor through the Department of Aging's budget remained. They were good things that will support programming and local services, including an additional $2 million per year for Alzheimer's and dementia respite programs, and support through the Department of Aging's administrative budget for an aging economy report, which I think will be very helpful in setting policy in the future. We desperately need some technology modernization for systems that the Department of Aging uses for Passport and other programs. And so there is $6 million allocated from, I believe that those are ARPA dollars as well, that can support that upgrade, which we are very happy about. And then there was a new earmark for Benjamin Rose Institute to provide mental health services to older adults. And they are based in Cleveland, but they do have a lot of online programming and programs they provide across the country. Next slide, please. And the big thing that we are extremely excited about, but there's still work to be done, is rate increases for the direct care workforce, home care. In the budget, the governor had proposed increases that would enable providers to pay around $16 an hour as the base rate, compared to that $10 to $12 an hour that they're able to pay now. Through the House, there was additional funding provided with language that the base rate would go up to $17 per hour for the wage in 2024, and then $18 per hour in 2025. What happened through the governor's veto process, as he did in the last budget, he line item vetoed the language. So the funding for these rate increases is there, but the specific reference to amounts for the rates is not, which is something they've have stated that they do not want wage amounts or rates in statute, but they're committed to working through the process of providing these rate increases. The expectation is that these will be effective in January of 2024. There were also other rate increases for other services identified in the executive budget that remained through the process. And then the department has also put out a white paper when they began this process of the budget of some policy changes, like building up self-direction and other important programs to serve older adults. Next slide, please. There's some good language in the budget around the direct care workforce and supporting provider rates. One of them, it was part of the governor's budget, was that a commitment to use the rate increase funding to ensure that the workforce is stable and that there's greater access. And one of the things that we stressed is parity across programs and populations, because there were different rates for different populations. And as I said, aging had some of the lowest rates. And so I know through the budget process, Director Corcoran and Director McElroy have stressed the need for alignment and parity. And so that is something we'll hold them to as we see the rollout of provider rate increases. And then finally, there was, can go back just one more thing. The other piece of language that was included in the budget was a requirement to submit an annual report outlining the wages paid to direct care staff. So that'll be good to monitor how things are going, and it provides some transparency in that area. Okay, now next slide. Another thing that happened was in the Senate, language was introduced to expand MyCare Ohio to the entire state. MyCare Ohio is a Medicare, Medicaid dual demonstration program in 29 counties right now in Ohio. So it's a demonstration program provided for the federal government through CMS. That program nationally is supposed to end by December 2025. And in Ohio, we've implemented that through MyCare Ohio. In the meantime, we now have language that requires the Medicaid director to seek approval to expand MyCare statewide. It does include language that the area agencies on aging are to be used for waiver service coordination, and that's what they're doing now in the demonstration, and allows for full delegation of care coordination to the area agencies on aging. And this is important not only because it's for the current demonstration, but there's language in there about the successor program. So the department is now working on a transition to a successor program that wouldn't be a demonstration program, but is through current Medicare Advantage special needs plans. And so they're working on how that's going to roll out. But we are very pleased that the area agencies on aging were included in that. And next slide. And then finally, Adult Protective Services, thrilled to see an additional $4 million per year in that line item to support Adult Protective Services. This is the only funding this program gets unless they can get local funding. So this will provide every county enough to pay for one worker at $80,000 per year, plus additional funding to support other activities and needs through Adult Protective Services. So that's it. We're happy. I'm going to turn it back over to Kelsey.
Beth, thank you so much for starting us off on a very positive, good note. Some great wins. Thank you so much for your report, and thank you so much for all that you did to push these policies and make sure that we reach the finish line. So coming up next, we're excited to welcome Kalitha Williams from AARP to share their work, their policy priorities, and how everything shook out. Kalitha, take it away when you're ready.
Great. Good morning. Thank you, Kelsey. And thank you for this opportunity to share some of our own budget advocacy work. And thank you to all of the advocates on the call. I know there are only a handful of us presenting, but we are all co-laborers in this budget advocacy work. And I think we have much that we can be proud of. So, founded in 1958 by Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, AARP is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that empowers people to choose how they live as they age. We have over 38 million members nationwide and 1.5 million in Ohio. Thousands of our members were engaged throughout every aspect of our state budget advocacy, including our lobby day, our budget day of action, offering testimony in key committee hearings, phone calls, emails to state lawmakers, and teletown hall meetings with DeWine administration officials. We're really excited to have our thousands of members who were engaged in this process with us. So let's get into the policy. Older adults have been targeted for right-to-list agreements that are focused on the future listing of a home. A brokerage firm will offer a homeowner a few $100s to enter into a long-term agreement, many up to 40 years, to list the home for all future sales in that time period. Companies have tried to file these agreements with county recorder offices. And while it's unclear if the agreements are enforceable, they do intimidate any future homeowners from using another company to list their homes for sale. We found that these agreements were especially egregious, and working with the Ohio Land Title Association, the Ohio Prosecutors Association, and the Ohio County Recorders Association, we joined other states in outlawing these agreements in Ohio. So we're really elated that we have a prohibition on these agreements in the state of Ohio, and we were able to get that done through the budget. So Medicare supplemental insurance plans in the past were engaged in very aggressive and deceptive marketing tactics to older Ohioans, many of which were found to be downright fraud. These companies targeted residents in nursing homes, assisted living facilities, and harassed people by phone and through in-person solicitations. There were so many complaints, in fact, that in 2012, the superintendent of insurance instituted rules to stop these tactics. During the budget process, the House was considering an amendment that would have stripped the regulatory authority of the department to regulate these marketing tactics. But we were able to successfully work with the department to ensure that that amendment was never added to the budget. So AARP, we have consistently, not just in Ohio, but nationally, called on transparency policies to ensure that nursing homes use taxpayer funding to benefit patient care. Early in the year, Governor DeWine created the Nursing Home Quality and Accountability Task Force focused on promoting best-in-class long-term care facilities in our state. As a member of the task force, we organized our members across the state to share their personal stories at in-person listening tour meetings and engage thousands of our members on 2 tele-town halls with the Ohio Department of Aging Director, where we shared solutions for reforming nursing homes. The task force final report included several of our recommendations, many of which were passed in the final budget. And I'll just highlight a few here. One included providing funding support to expand our state ombudsman long-term care program, which investigate complaints against nursing homes, hiring additional nursing home surveyors who are responsible for examining facilities and ensuring they are compliant and providing quality care, and ensuring consumers have up-to-date resources about individual nursing facilities so they can select the best one for their needs or the needs of their loved one. Next slide, please. The budget also included providing nursing homes with an additional up to $30 a day for Medicaid beneficiaries who reside in a private room, which we believe is important for infection control. The budget also included a provision to ensure that there is full and complete disclosure and transparency on the ownership, operation, and management of all Ohio nursing homes. And then there was also a provision around assisted living facilities, of which we were engaged. In Ohio, the assisted living waiver participants are required to have a private bathroom. There was a provision added in the conference committee report that would have changed that requirement and allowed shared bathrooms under the program. We oppose this on the grounds that it's not good for infection control in congregate settings. Governor DeWine vetoed that provision. And we believe and will continue to work on additional what we believe are needed nursing home reform measures. Despite how elated we are with the nursing home provisions that were included in the budget, we have more that we think should be in place. And that includes instituting a direct care ratio of at least 90% to ensure that the majority of taxpayer funding for nursing homes goes to ensure residents get high quality care. And then to determine the amount of actual funding going to resident care, Ohio nursing homes should have to provide fully audited financial statements. And we believe that all Ohio licensed nursing homes should be held to these requirements. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to stay throughout this webinar. However, if you have any questions, comments, declarations, don't hesitate to contact me at the information provided.
Kalitha, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you again for your advocacy and the work that your members have done to continue pushing for these wins. And I know there sounds like there's still some fights on the horizon, but thank you for your leadership and thanks for being here today. Thanks again, Kalitha. Moving up next, we're excited to welcome Sarah Kuhns from the Ohio Association of Foodbanks. Sarah, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Thanks, Kelsey, and thanks everyone for being here today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about nutrition and food and how it kind of landed in the state budget. Like Kelsey said, my name is Sarah Kuhns. I'm the Advocacy and Engagement Manager here at the Ohio Association of Foodbanks. We represent the 12 Feeding America food banks in Ohio and their 3,600 partner agencies. So before we get kind of into the nitty-gritty about the policy details in the state budget, I wanted to provide some context for why we needed a food secure state budget. So I'm sure many of you have heard, but in March 2023, we experienced the expiration of the extra COVID SNAP benefits. That resulted in a loss of $126 million per month that were eliminated from Ohioans' food budgets, directly impacting them and the local economies that they live in and exist in. In addition to that, they also are experiencing high rates of food inflation and rising costs for basic needs. And a lot of our food banks are even now still seeing higher numbers of Ohioans coming to our food bank lines. So in order to kind of capture that, we decided to conduct a statewide survey of clients. We did this in late April and early May of this year. And a lot of the highlights are quite bleak. So about a third said that they would rely on us more often in the next 2 months. 2 in 3 households served by Ohio food banks have adults in the household that cut the size of their meals or skipped meals entirely in the past 12 months. And a majority of households were making really difficult trade-offs between food and other basic needs, including 68% of households that responded were saying that they were making trade-offs between food and transportation or gas. So really kind of making the case as to why we needed a strong food secure state budget. And before I kind of get into the policy details, I really wanted to say that although I'm presenting today, this is all of these incremental wins and progress that has been made in the state budget is done in coalition. And there's plenty of leaders that deserve thanks and applause for all of the great work that was included in the state budget and all the work that they have done. So these are just the highlights, but of course there's many more to be explored and looked through. As for food bank funding, the executive budget flat funded Ohio food banks at $24.55 million per year. And the executive budget, it turns out in the final state budget, the food banks received a $7.5 million increase per year in the final budget. We're really happy and thankful that the General Assembly and the DeWine administration heard Hungry Ohioans' calls and really supported them by investing in Ohio's food banks. A huge win, especially for hunger-free schools of Ohio, was a change in reduced price meals. So the Hunger-Free Schools Ohio campaign pushed for free school meals for all Ohio kids. The final policy that ended up in the past budget was a provision that directed that all reduced price school meals be free beginning this school year. This is huge, especially because this is the first year that the campaign got off the ground, and there was a lot of enthusiasm that led to this effort. This equates to approximately 80,000 more Ohio school children receiving free school meals. So I want to say that we're really happy that we were a part of that campaign and that coalition, and we're really thankful to our partners, especially Children's Defense Fund of Ohio, that kind of led that effort. For Children's Hunger Alliance, they also received funding to support their programs of alleviating childhood hunger. Their final appropriation in the state budget was $3.75 million per year. And then I know my fellow colleagues and presenters already talked a lot about healthy aging grants, but I just wanted to echo that we're really happy to see those included in the state budget and are excited to see how that is implemented to make sure that older Ohioans are supported, and the focus is on aging in place and aging with dignity. And so, of course, there's always more work to be done. And I wanted to share some upcoming opportunities for impact and for you to engage. So on the state level, the Hunger Free Schools Ohio campaign is not done. They're looking at ways to address school meal debt and shaming, as well as moving the needle forward on universal school meals. Another state priority is bringing a hunger-free college campus campaign to Ohio and a $50 minimum SNAP benefit for older adults. I know that many advocates, including ourselves at the association, were pushing for a $50 minimum SNAP benefit during this budget. Unfortunately, it wasn't included, but I think it really opened the door for a conversation about, why is the minimum SNAP benefit so low, and how we can support older adults, but also everyone receiving SNAP and receiving that minimum SNAP benefit. And then, of course, the big thing, this is a big year for food policy and nutrition policy, is the Farm Bill on the federal level. That is the huge food and agriculture bill that moves through Congress every 5 years. And some of our priorities include making sure benefits are adequate, making sure there's expanded access for nutrition programs, and making sure that we make enhancements, much enhancements to security on cards that support those SNAP benefits and other nutrition benefits. Next slide, please. And then I'm not going to go into detail here about these resources, but I know that the slides are going to be shared out, so I wanted to share some of the resources available. Please feel free to go back into the slides and look at these if you would like to learn further. Next slide. And then, as I was talking about enhanced security for SNAP benefits, Congress made a change in the annual appropriations bill that they passed last December to provide replacement benefits to families whose SNAP benefits have been stolen or skimmed. This is a temporary change, but there is resources available and a way to request replacement SNAP benefits. If you just go to that link right there when you're looking at the slides, I think we need to have a conversation during the Farm Bill about making a permanent change. The SNAP EBT cards are very vulnerable to this sort of theft, and we can make some security enhancements, but wanted to make people aware of that temporary change, temporary fix. And I think that's all I have. Thanks so much to Kelsey and Beth for letting me talk a little bit today.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing so much of the fight from the food banks, and again, some wins and certainly some opportunities for advocacy coming down the road. So appreciate your time, and thank you as always for your partnership. We worked really closely these last few months and are excited about what we were able to accomplish. Coming up next, we are very excited to welcome Darold Johnson with the Ohio Federation of Teachers to share all that happened in the K through 12 education space. It's a lot to cover. Darold, whenever you're ready, take it away. Oh, you're on mute, Darold, my friend.
Okay, I just want to share this document that
Great.
okay. So OFT is not only represents teachers, we also represent teachers in K-12 and higher ed. We also represent the children's services workers in Franklin County and at several libraries in Central Ohio and coming soon to other places in the state. So we have a wide variety of interest. So we'll start with the good news, which is the school funding formula, the fair school funding plan that was started in the last budget, continued this budget. It was implemented, it was increased from a 2018 baseline to a 2022 baseline. So we have like over $1 billion investment into K-12, the largest investment in school funding. Also winners were the career tech centers, JBS centers, charter schools are big winners in the school funding formula as those funding streams were updated as well. One of the things that were also expanded was the universal voucher program, which was created. The program goes there and basically says that everybody who sends their kids to private school is now eligible for some remuneration from the state. If you're 450% of poverty, like 133,000 for a family of four, you will receive the full voucher amount, well, $7,500 for high school. If you're over 450% of poverty, you would get a reduced amount, but it caps out at, I think 700% of poverty, you'll get at least 10% of the voucher amount for K-12, for K-8 and for high school. Also, there was a big investment into literacy in this budget. The department has worked hard, and the governor put in his budget an expansion for literacy programs. There's like a $73 million increase in literacy programs. They will propose the science of reading program for working with kids and students throughout K-12 program. Its focus is more on phonics. And so we are looking at that as a good process, but we also want to make sure it bans another process of learning how to read unless you get a waiver or 504 special designation. So, but we think all kids should have all resources to learn, and we shouldn't be banning any kind of process that helps students to learn. Teacher salary, the House put in a $40,000 starting salary for new teachers. The Senate took that language out. The conference committee put it in at 35. There's about 3,600 or 3,400 teachers who would benefit from going from a minimum salary at $35,000. The current minimum salary is $30,000, and that was passed like 4 years ago. Look at it, higher ed. Higher ed had some increases in there for in the House budget, in the governor's budget, there were significant increases in there. As we went through the process, they will sort of winnow down through the process, but we can still use state share, and OCOG got some increases. We also we work with libraries, have members at libraries, and they was going back and forth between how much money was going to be available to them. We're happy that they were kept at their 1.7% of general revenue, so that they will receive continual funding as the overall revenue has increased. So another education policy that was left out of the budget was Senate Bill 83, which is a rollback of not only labor rights, but education and free speech rights and academic freedom rights in the higher ed institutions. Senate Bill 83 passed the Senate on a partisan vote. It remains in the House for consideration, along with a companion House bill. So we anticipate seeing that bill later this fall. The chair of higher ed, the House Higher Ed Committee, said that they would move that bill in the fall. Senate Bill 1 was language that changes the Department of Education. In 1953, citizens of Ohio voted for an independent Department of Education, the creation of a state school board. The state school board would then hire the superintendent of instruction. It was deemed by the folks in Ohio at that time, between the legislature and surveys of the community back in 1955, that the state board should be the instrument for how education should work in the state. Senate Bill 1 reverses all that. It reverts it from an independent agency back to an executive branch agency. It restricts the power of the board basically to hire the superintendent of public instruction, deal with licensing issues, territorial transfers, and alike. There is lots of discussion out there in the world about whether that was constitutional or not. We'll see where this ends up in future weeks, but Senate Bill 1 requires that the governor appoints a director of the new Department of Education and Workforce. And so with the director job comes 2 deputy director jobs, one for education and one for workforce. And those 3 positions will be confirmed by the Senate, and they have 60 days to confirm those people after being nominated. Charter schools, there's an expansion in charter schools in terms of funding. They benefit from, additional resources, but we also have concerns about how we keep accountability of charter schools, how charter school sponsors keep accountability over those programs. And so we're going to be looking at that as we move forward. There's a 3rd grade reading guarantee, and that 3rd grade reading guarantee is basically set up so that on the current law, that if the 3rd grader doesn't pass the reading test, now there's 2 parts of the reading test. One is reading and one is a computer test. A lot of times kids do okay on a reading, but are not so skilled at the computer part of it, and so they end up failing. And there's a mandatory retention. We oppose that. There's bills in the legislature that oppose that mandatory retention, but that does stay in. They do modify the language a little bit that says that current law says that parents can work with teachers to have their child advance to the 4th grade. That is available, but the modification is that they now need to have a intervention plan for 4th, 5th grade in moving forward. The governor vetoed the vaccination language that said, no, if somebody didn't have a vaccine, they couldn't be prevented from coming or staying on campus. He vetoed that. Some of the language changes for teacher licensure is important for us because one of the things that we want to make sure is we have high quality teachers in front of our students. This budget removes the post-secondary requirement for substitutes so that anybody who has a high school degree can be a substitute and can get a license for a year to be a substitute. We're concerned about that because we still want to make sure we have high quality subs and teachers in the classroom. So we weren't happy with that. Creates a new alternative military education pathway. We already have a pathway for military troops to teachers program, and that requires to make sure that those individuals are qualified in their subject and qualified to lead a classroom. The different grade bands are proposed there for teachers. This supposedly gives more flexibility, but it doesn't relate to how teacher prep programs work in the state and how we had other previous licenses. So that's sort of the highlights for us in terms of the budget and the education pieces, and turn it back to Kelsey.
Darold, thank you so much for sharing. Lots of changes to report, certainly, and some structural changes to adjust to moving forward. Thank you for your leadership, of course, and your advocacy over the past few months. And again, as we learn how some of these changes take place and are implemented in the future. So up next, we are very excited to welcome Amy Meade from Groundwork, Ohio, to share with us about early education, childcare, and everything that went down over these past few months. So Amy, whenever you're ready, please take it away.
Thank you, Kelsey, and thank you all for joining us today. My name is Amy Meade. I am the Center for Early Learning Director here at Groundwork, Ohio. For those of you who may not be familiar with our organization, Groundwork Ohio is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organization that advances research-proven policies that result in public investments in Ohio's children ages 0 to 5. Next slide, and next slide. So first, we just want to thank everyone who stood to advocate for young children in this budget. We have been so impressed with the amount of support we've got in the last 6 months. We hosted an advocacy day that was that so many people showed up than ever before. So many people, participated in our webinars. They shared their experiences and perspectives and thoughts with our policymakers. We also sent a series of 3 letters to policymakers that urged investments in young children, and it was signed by thousands of business and professional organizations, as well as childcare workforce professionals and parents from around the state. So we have been blown away by the amount of support, and we know that there is so much work to do. So our advocacy on this budget included ensuring every child has a strong start to life. So that meant from prenatal care to kindergarten readiness, and that mothers have access to care to ensure that their babies are healthy throughout their pregnancy, their delivery, and the first months of life. And then we really just tried to reiterate the fact that how our state's economic strength relies on quality, accessible, and affordable childcare. But while the budget did include minor spending investments for Ohio's young children, in the end, there was little response to these calls and others. Despite the disappointing outcome of the budget, the final budget did include a restoration of $47 million in Senate cuts to the investments proposed by the governor and the Ohio House of Representatives. So ending the budget deliberations with $154 million in new investments. So this includes $30 million for childcare, and these funds are are to be used to award childcare infrastructure grants to provide safe and developmentally appropriate childcare for infants and toddlers in Appalachian communities and communities with high infant mortality rates. And then also an expansion to preschool with $124 million. We are really thrilled with this preschool investment in addition to the childcare investment, because it really does show the inextricable link between preschool and childcare. And this preschool investment will benefit more than 11,525 children. So we really are grateful for, the preschool investment as well as the childcare expansion. There was a line item veto from Governor DeWine that improves the state operating budget by striking a provision that would have exempted more licensed childcare programs from meeting step up to quality rating requirements. We know that all our kids deserve high quality care. And so we were grateful that one of our line item vetoes was included in the 44 vetoes that Governor DeWine did do. And then there was a line item veto from Governor DeWine that improves the state operating budget by striking a provision that would have limited Medicaid coverage of doula services to only 5 years. So there was language saying that it was going to be a pilot program. Now it's just a long-term program. Next slide. Oh, maybe no, this is it. So the budget did fall short in several ways. So we were disappointed that the governor did not veto the prohibition on considering degrees in the rating system. And we were disappointed that the governor failed to dramatically expand publicly funded childcare eligibility to 160% of the federal poverty level. It was only increased to 145%. But we are pleased to, as I said, report that while Medicaid coverage for doula services remained in the budget through conference committee, Governor DeWine vetoed language that would make the program a pilot program. So the policy remains in effect long term. We recognize we have a lot of work to do, but Groundwork Ohio will continue leading that work and advocating for young children. And we look forward to working with many of you on this call, for the next 18 months until the next budget season to really push our priorities through the state legislature. So thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. Apologies, I was typing in the Q&A section. And Amy, and it was really fantastic to watch, again, the just momentum that was really behind children and families in this budget. And thank you for standing with AOF on some of our advocacy activities as well. We appreciate your partnership and look forward again to continuing some of those fights in the coming months. Excellent, Amy. So before we reach our final speaker, we're excited for Zach from Policy Matters Ohio to join us. Just wanted to cover a couple really sections and policy areas in the budget that we weren't able, or some of our partners were unable to join us today to share about. The first is housing provisions. I know there was a bit of a wild ride for housing provisions in the budget compared from the governor to the House to the Senate version. Really kind of came down to the wire. We know that housing and affordable housing, particularly at this point in time in the state, is of great concern. Again, the state is fortunate to be experiencing a boon in economic growth and development really across the state, and particularly here in Central Ohio. We also know that housing units, affordable housing units, are really in the thousands numbers behind in making sure that we can house those new workers who will be joining us in the state, again, to work close to where that they will be working and making sure that their housing is affordable and quality, of course. So a couple wins that I wanted to report. So these came, I just wanted to share from our partners at Ohio. Again, overall, the budget was a win in the housing space and included the first major new state housing program in many, many years. So this is fantastic news. We saw an investment in multifamily housing tax credit program, an increase in the Ohio Housing Trust Fund, which is fantastic. And of course, really excited to see continued funding for the Ohio Department of Health's Youth Homelessness Program. And also there was an issue at the end of the last General Assembly. There was an amendment that would restrict some use of some tax credits for affordable housing, and especially those properties with the rent restrictions. That fix did happen, and I'm excited to report that that won't be an issue moving forward. So a couple things that we wanted to share did not include. So these are both good things and bad things that were at some point in the budget. I know the Senate added some provisions that were particularly maybe not helpful in the housing space. But it did not include the prohibition of using fees or state funds to maintain a rental registry. So this is good news. Also did not expand the ban on pairing historic preservation tax credits and other housing subsidies. So these are two good things that they did not include. They were included in the Senate version. They got pulled out in conference, which is good news to report. And also, the final version of the budget did not include the Senate's plan to abolish the Ohio Housing Finance Agency. I know that was certainly news and a shock to a lot of folks in the housing space, but happy to report that that agency will, of course, continue their operations and the great work they do for the people of Ohio. Up next, I wanted to share just a few additional provisions in terms of infant, child, and maternal health. So the budget did unfortunately include an 81% cut to the Healthy Beginnings at Home program, which houses pregnant women and families who are homelessness or at risk of homelessness. We know that housing stability can really lead to better health outcomes and pregnancy outcomes for both pregnant women and babies in those first few months and leading up to the birth. So we are excited to continue to work with our partners at Ohio to make sure that some progress, maybe some additional funding can be directed towards this program. Next, I wanted to report on what happened with doula coverage in the budget. We know that there was some confusion in the media the first few days around doula coverage. There were some veto messages that were a little bit confusing to be able to decipher how those final provisions kind of played out. But we are really excited and confident to share that Medicaid coverage for birthing doulas is now a permanent program in the Department of Medicaid, which is a hard-fought battle. I know a lot of our partners have worked diligently on this issue the past few years, the past few General Assemblies, to make sure that doulas will be covered by Medicaid, and this is a service available to pregnant women who qualify for Medicaid. The governor's line item veto simply removed the biggest part, removed a 5-year limit to the program, or kind of like maybe a pilot testing time limitation that was included in the final version of the bill. So it makes it even better and makes the availability and coverage of doulas permanent moving forward. So that is really, really great news. Also wanted to share another fantastic win that Medicaid eligible children will now receive continuous coverage through Medicaid from birth through age 3, or really to their 4th birthday. So this is really important. This consistent access to care will continue to lead to better health outcomes for kids, particularly Medicaid eligible kids, so that they, when they need that care, that support, those early interventions or checkups that are so vital in the first few years of life, that those are available for folks, and parents won't have to worry about, even if their income may fluctuate, that their children remain eligible for the program and they don't have to continue to apply or redetermine or kind of go through that whole process to renew their children's Medicaid coverage, again, up to their 4th birthday. So that is great news. One very last element, really kind of an umbrella over Medicaid. I wanted to share one provision that did make it through the end of the bill, and this is a provision that AOF is not supportive of. I would guess to say a lot of our partners here on the call are certainly not supportive of this provision either. The final version of the budget included a requirement for the Department of Medicaid to develop and ask for a work requirement waiver for Medicaid coverage to the federal government in February of 2025. So work requirements have been kind of a part of the Medicaid discussion for many years. At least AOF's position is that they are not helpful in moving folks from the Medicaid program into continued job coverage, and that really a person's health and consistent access to healthcare comes first when folks are on their path to self-sufficiency, sustainability, and that, of course, we want to make sure that that access to healthcare remains less burdensome and is there for folks when they need that extra support. So again, the requirement in the budget doesn't implement kind of this ask or delays the ask for this waiver from the Department of Medicaid until February of 2025. There are certainly lots of steps until that point. Things like presidential elections and possibly some administration either changes or continuing with the same administration. So we will certainly keep our eyes on that provision, continue to have discussions with the Department of Medicaid if that waiver and if that requirement does come to fruition. So that really covers kind of the health and Medicaid provisions. Some good news to be shared. Again, there were some other great provisions that almost made it to the finish line. Things like increasing Medicaid eligibility for pregnant women and children up to 300% of the federal poverty level, and other items that we will continue to advocate for in the next few months. So folks, thank you again for your time and for everyone again who helped AOF and our partner organizations push those provisions forward. And I'm excited to introduce Zach Schiller from Policy Matters Ohio, talk to us about what happened with all those tax provisions at the end and what we can expect moving forward. Zach, when you're ready, take us away.
Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for the opportunity to talk. I'm Zach Schiller with Policy Matters Ohio. Many of you probably know we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, and we do work on many state issues, but we've done a lot on tax policy in particular. So I'm going to try and run through three of the biggest tax policy changes. There are dozens of others that I'm not going to try and cover that may be important, but don't have quite the same fiscal consequences. And I'm also oversimplifying a little bit in this presentation, as much as you may find it difficult to wade through. So there are three really big tax changes, or the three biggest tax changes in the bill. One of them cuts income taxes, both rates and brackets. And over the next couple of years, it's going to cost close to $1 billion a year in revenue that we otherwise would have gotten. A second one cuts the main business tax, known as the commercial activity tax, which is eliminated on receipts below $6 million a year. The cost of that is over $500 million a year, again, in revenue that the state will not receive. And then thirdly, there's a one-time sales tax holiday, which means that sometime in August 2024, for some period of time that has to be determined, you won't have to pay sales tax on items up to $500 in value, with few exceptions like alcohol, tobacco, and other items. Next slide, please. So the income tax changes are the biggest of these, and this continues the policy that we've seen now for close to 2 decades. Basically, it's been cutting the income tax, especially cutting the tax on the top end. And the income tax, of course, is the only progressive tax in Ohio that you pay according to your ability. And so when you cut it, you're effectively subsidizing the highest income Ohioans and doing very little or nothing for people at the bottom. So we'll get to what these meant in a moment, but we reduced the top rate again from 3.99 to 3.5%. I may recall that under Governor Voinovich, this was as high as 7.5% on income over $200,000. We've been cutting brackets and cutting rates for a number of years now. They also cut the rate by an almost infinitesimal amount on income between about $26,000 going up to $100,000, but especially people making between 40 and 50 will see a very tiny, tiny rate cut. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for people of different incomes? Well, if you make less than $26,000, you don't pay income tax, so this will not give you any kind of change. For a family of 3 with an income of $50,000, it actually amounts to an increase. Now, you may not have heard much about this from our legislators because for some reason they didn't want you to know about it. But in fact, for many, many Ohioans, this will in fact mean an increase. Well, why is that? Because one of the things that they did that's kind of invisible in a way, but does result in increases in taxes that are paid is, as it is now, what we do is we index the brackets and exemptions for inflation. So for example, that $26,050, which is the threshold at which you start paying tax, if there was no change, that would increase by inflation next year. And so it would be probably another $1,000 or more higher than that. And that would mean that people with up to another $1,000 in income would not be paying tax. And it means that everybody else with income of more than that would be paying a lower rate on that $1,000 in income. So it probably means that just that alone is like a $14, $15 savings, or not savings, $15 savings that you won't be getting. Multiply that by 5 million taxpayers, and it's $70 million a year. So I won't try and confuse you with more multiplication experiments, but the basic point is, by not protecting Ohioans for inflation, by not increasing the brackets by inflation and the personal exemption, which you also received for every dependent you have, it means that it's actually a tax increase. And so if the rate cuts were not large enough, as they weren't, as I've explained, the rate cut for somebody making 30, 40,000 was infinitesimal, you're actually seeing an increase as opposed to a cut. And this, as you'll see in a moment, affects close to half of taxpayers. For people at the top, however, while they see those increases, they're completely outstripped by the rate and bracket cuts. And so somebody making over $500,000 will see a cut of more than $2,000 a year. The overall impact of this means that a large number of Ohio families will see a small increase in taxes over the next couple of years, while the most affluent will see thousands of dollars in tax cuts. Overall, 85% of the tax cut goes to people making over $124,000 a year. Next slide, please. So this graph shows you essentially what it means for people with different income levels. It phases out, so it doesn't show you somebody at 500,000, but it shows you that people making over 26,000 will basically be paying more, leaving out exemptions. And that begins to phase down so that about the time that you reach the median income in Ohio, you'd actually see a no change in taxes. But for many, many people, there will actually be a small tax increase. And then as your income goes up, you'll see a bigger and bigger cut. Next slide, please. This table breaks it down based on each group. So like the column on the left shows you people making less than $23,000 a year. The bottom fifth of Ohio taxpayers will see an average tax change of nothing because they're all below the threshold at which you start paying the income tax. And if you look at the far column on the right, you'll see that people making over $621,000, the richest 1%, will see a $4,400 average tax cut. They will get 32% of the tax cut, just that top 1% of Ohioans. So you can see overall that the group of the bottom 60% is getting, on average, an increase, a small increase, but either they won't see any change at all, or they'll actually see a very small increase in taxes. Next slide, please. So let's move on to the other couple of major changes. The commercial activity tax is a tax that's kind of like a sales tax, but it's paid businesses when they sell in Ohio. So it's based on their Ohio receipts. And so right now, the vast majority of Ohio businesses don't pay much, if any, tax, because we have a current minimum that if you have receipts of less than $150,000, you pay nothing. And if you have less than $1 million, you pay a flat $150. So what they did is they raised the threshold at which companies start paying the tax. And so 90% of the businesses in Ohio will now not pay tax. However, while that will help some mid-sized companies, the largest part of this actually is going to companies with more than $6 million in revenue, that 10% of Ohio companies that are the largest companies in Ohio. So while the smallest companies in Ohio pay little or no tax already, the majority of this reduction is going to larger businesses. It may be framed as something different when you hear about it from the legislators. The other thing is that there isn't a need for a business tax cut in Ohio. Our business taxes are well under the national average, and you don't have to take my word for it on that. That's something that the main lobbying group for big business employs Ernst & Young to do an annual study, and that's what they find. Representative Edwards, you may have seen in comments after the budget passed, while apparently opposition was not great enough to keep this from going through, there is some concern about whether this is a sustainable practice. Next slide, please. So then also we have the sales tax holiday. And this is something that the Tax Foundation, which is kind of the leading right-wing authority on taxes that's often turned to, as well as the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, which is leading progressive national tax policy institute, agree that this is a unproductive gimmick. It means that upper income taxpayers who have income that they can put aside can take advantage of this most easily, as opposed to people living paycheck to paycheck who can't put aside large amounts of money to take advantage of this when it comes up temporarily. Meanwhile, retailers may actually be able to raise prices and pocket some of the savings. There's a better alternative to this, which actually targets sales tax relief to those who actually need it, which is called a sales tax credit. I won't go into the details, but if you're interested, we have seen that put forward in some earlier legislatures, and it is existing policy in half a dozen states around the country. Next slide, please. So now there was some confusion, just as with the doulas, on some of the tax policy when it came to Governor DeWine's vetoes. He did make some vetoes relating to the sales tax holiday and to the cat tax, but they didn't fundamentally change the amount of the tax cut or the fact that it would go forward. And the sales tax holiday, it just meant that it's not necessarily 14 days. However, one of his vetoes was significant. And what he did, and this is especially confusing, but a third part of the income tax cuts that will not go forward was what the General Assembly had done was they had taken this suspension of bracket indexing, adjusting the brackets for inflation and the personal exemption, which saves the state hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue each year if those are not adjusted. So what they did is they were going to extend that off into the future beyond the current biennium and use the savings to reduce the rate on income below $26,000. And so DeWine didn't go for that. And so he vetoed it. And so that part of the tax cut will not go forward. And so the suspension of the indexing will only go ahead for the next 2 years. And that will reduce the overall size of the tax cut and mean increases in taxes, income tax paid by moderate income and middle-class taxpayers, but the rest of it won't go forward. Next slide, please. So summarizing, this means that we will have more than $3 billion in revenue over the next 2 years that is unavailable for education and public services. So all the things that you've heard about over the previous hour or so that we did not succeed in getting, this could have paid for it, and it isn't. Most of these cuts will go to the wealthiest Ohioans, and of course, the next time we have a recession, this weakens our finances. It means that we won't be getting over $1 billion, probably close to $500 million in revenue every year. And so it makes it more likely that we'll see more drastic budget cuts the next time the recession comes and the revenues inevitably decline. And so it's poor fiscal policy to engage in this kind of tax cutting as well, beyond the fact that it's shifting taxes from the people most able to pay to the rest of us and reducing the amount of revenue that's available. So going forward, we need to, I think that there was a sort of victory here in the sense that many people had thought we might actually go to a simply flat income tax, which did not happen. And that was in House Bill 1 that was put forward earlier in the session, and many had thought that that might be included in the budget. So there was a modest victory in that not going forward. But we need to further preserve the income tax as the main tax that actually is paid according to your ability, and to fight off additional efforts to weaken it, as we've seen over the past 20 years. Thanks very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Zach, thank you so much for that rundown. It is so much to digest and lots of changes, certainly in the tax space. And you're right, sounds like there's still some discussion among leaders around some of those changes that were made. Good ideas, bad ideas. We'll see how everything continues to roll out. So folks, we still have a number of presenters with us. these next few minutes. We have some big picture questions in the Q&A, and certainly pose these to all of our presenters if you'd like to hop in. So the first is a question of, is there an opportunity in the next year and a half before the next budget to lay the groundwork for getting the good stuff that was cut from the current budget included in 2025? So next year will be Governor DeWine's last budget or legacy budget, as we'll see. Would there be opportunities for bigger or broader investments, given that this will be Governor DeWine's final budget coming in, again, 2 years from now? Open to thoughts from our presenters on what you think that last budget could look like, and any opportunity, if any.
There's always opportunity to advocate for more, and we always should. So, I think in terms of provider rate increases, we didn't hit the $20 per hour that we were asking for, and we will absolutely be advocating for more, because while we had a tremendous increase, it's not enough. And we are still very far behind in supporting older adults in our community. So we'll be starting this process. And as those of you know who have done this for several years, the process starts almost a year before the bill is introduced, by talking to the administration, your legislators, preparing and sharing your priorities. And that's something that, this budget's done. We're going to be starting soon on the next one.
Agreed. Next, we have a focus question. This one's for you, Darold, if you're ready. Will parents have the ability to opt their child out of the 3rd grade reading guarantee for this upcoming school year?
I just met with our members yesterday, and that was a big question from teachers as well. So they will be able to. So let me answer it this way, because it's the way it was asked to me yesterday. If you have a 3rd grader who didn't pass the reading exam and now is supposedly to be retained, if the parent wants to move that child to the 4th grade, they still have the capacity to move it to the 4th grade under even the old law, but they just have to, under the new law, the districts has to have a clear intervention plan for going forward.
Darold, thank you for that. Next question is dedicated to Zach. What are the SAL changes, and the impact?
I'm going to have to punt on that. I knew it some time ago, and I believe, as I recall, that there were, I think this is basically, there were changes that DeWine vetoed that would have tightened up on the SAL. The state appropriation limit was passed, I believe, in 2006 as a kind of way for the legislature to claim that it was putting some cap on expenditures in lieu of a constitutional amendment that would have severely limited our ability to see increases in spending. And so it's a legislative cap that can be easily removed by legislative action, which is the most important thing. It's more of a political thing than it is a real one, in that the legislature can always vote to overturn it and to spend anyway. But they had included some further limitations in it that would have reduced the amount that they're allowed to increase spending. And the governor vetoed those, I believe. So I think that it remains largely intact. And it has not, in fact, really had a major impact on our ability to spend during that time period. So I wouldn't say that it's irrelevant, but it hasn't proven to be a really major impediment. And I don't think the changes will result in a change to that history.
Great, Zach, thank you for that. SAL state appropriations limit. It took a second to kick in for me as well. Amy, next question. And I think I know the answer that you're going to share. Why not increase the child care subsidy rate to 200% of the federal poverty level? Why not?
Well, for us at Groundwork, we recognize that there has been such an a lack of available care for families anyway. So there's not enough teachers for the spots that are already available. And there's not just enough care in general across our state of Ohio. So we felt that increasing the childcare subsidy without increasing access to childcare, that would just mean more kids on waiting lists. It just would mean more families not returning to work because they couldn't have their, there wasn't a spot available to them. Many families are on wait lists for months and months and months. So we thought we need to advocate for increasing capacity before we advocate for having more kids gaining access.
Amy, thank you so much for that answer. Darold, 2 quick ones for you. Well, they might not be quick. Are there 2 education departments? Does ODE still exist? And 2, will the science of reading portion require schools to pick a curriculum from an approved list?
To the second one, yes, there will be an approved list. To the first part, are there 2 departments? No, there is one department now called the Department of Education and Workforce, unless there's some legal actions that creates a stay to that effect, but there's only one department.
Great, Darold, thank you so much for that. And then this one is for you, Beth. For direct care wages, are we confident that ODM will write an administrative rule with a high enough minimum wage, or will the advocacy process have to start all over again to get to the wage that workers really need?
Well, I think that's a great question. I do think we will need to continue to advocate, trying to figure out how much is needed in the budget to support the right amount of wages is tricky. So I think the process will be first is this will go into rule. There'll be an opportunity for public comment. So there'll be some opportunity to advocate on the rule itself. But I think we need to support more advocacy and telling the story of why we need more. Because I know the funding in there is probably not enough for $17 to $18 an hour. There's also some federal regulations that may be coming down soon that would require states to provide in their provider rates, 80% of that rate be for wages and benefits and 20% for admin. And that just closed for public comment, but there are, as you can imagine, a lot of comments about that, pro, con, trying to figure out what's the best ratio. So there's still a lot of work to be done on rates and figuring out what's the right amount, both for providers and for the worker.
Beth, thank you so much for that. Next question. I think, Amy, we can answer this one together. It feels like child policies investments were a bit of a mixed bag at the end of the day. It seems contrary to the governor's big vision for the new Department of Children and Youth. Why did we not see bigger child investments? Amy, if you want to start, I can add maybe some of my thoughts at the end.
Great. I mean, that is an excellent question. We recognize at the end result falls short of what Ohio's young children and families deserve, and what our businesses and professional organizations have demanded the last 6 months. We are frustrated as well. We don't know what we feel we've done all the things, right? It's our policymakers that have not made this a priority. So despite that, like I said during my remarks, so many people have advocated alongside us. And so we know that there's still a lot of work to be done, but we feel very hopeful and very, we just recognize that there's so much support behind us. So we're just going to keep, thinking of new and innovative ways to educate our policymakers on the importance of childcare and investments in young children and their families. And so we hope, whoever wrote this will join us, and, feel free to reach out to me to share your frustrations. And then, maybe we can think about ways that we can work together to try to, make our voices heard even more. But I hear you. We recognize that this is disappointing.
Just to second that, Amy, certainly agree, and confident and excited around what we've heard around the new Department of Children and Youth. And would just emphasize that again, the advocacy, again, the governor and the administration is certainly have proved that their vision is in the right direction for Ohio's youth. And some of our elected leaders require some additional advocacy and suggesting, we'll say, as to why it's an important investment. Next question is for you, Sarah. So was reduced price meal funding the goal of hunger-free schools, or will you keep advocating for more school meal funding?
Yeah, thanks for that question. The reduced price meal funding was a great first step, but we're absolutely looking to advocate for free school meals for all in the coming months and years, and would be happy to have you all join us.
Sarah, thank you so much. AOF will certainly be part of that fight as well. And this is the maybe a joint question to both Darold and Amy. We saw in this budget, school voucher eligibility rose to 450% and more of the federal poverty level, while childcare help only rose to 145%. What gives? And why is there such a huge disparity?
Well, first of all, it's an abomination that we're going to pay people who, anybody who sends their child to a private school. Zach just showed you the numbers about the top 1%. Those families are going to be eligible to receive at least $750 to send their kid to high school. That money would be much better served if we put it in preschool. That if we said to that childcare worker, if we had preschool people who we could make sure had like a bachelor's degree or a master's degree or administrators, if we could up their education, we will have children ready to learn coming to school, and we wouldn't have this big issue about third grade. So I think it's an abomination. I think that we talked about it in our testimony. Melissa Cropper, when she testified in the House and Senate, talked about how we are, giving these education dollars to wealthy people and individuals who already made the choice to send their kid to private school. And now we're not meeting the needs of the most desperate citizens, children, pregnant mothers, and young adults. So we got to continue the fight.
Yeah, and I'll add, it's disappointing. Definitely, it doesn't make sense, and I think it just shows that we just have to get back to the basic education of why early childhood education is so important. I think a lot, right? Like it's just starting from the basic brain science, I think it just we have to start from the beginning for folks to really truly understand why this is such a need. And as Darold had said, why this is such an important, we want kids to succeed in those later years, third grade reading, right? 8th grade math, high school graduation, and it all starts from the beginning. So obviously there's just still more educating that we need to do, and we're ready for it.
Excellent. One final question in our final minute together. Beth, I know you touched on this in an earlier answer, but what is the number one thing advocates can do over the coming months to keep pushing these policies forward, even though the budget is over? Anyone can hop in.
Well, I feel like,
Go ahead.
go ahead, Zach, go ahead.
I know that AOF doesn't take a position, but I would urge everyone to vote on August 8th.
Excellent. Beth, anything to add?
Well, I just suggest if there are areas that you are particularly interested in to watch our organization's messaging and updates for what's going on, because as I said, there's a lot of administrative implementation that has to occur. And in terms of things that did get through, making sure that it goes the way that we would like it to. And then, if something hasn't happened, we need to build that story and keep educating people about the need for these services and for support and resources. So I think I encourage everyone to continue to do that, but connecting with our organizations is a great way to do that and stay informed, and particularly AOF.
And just one quick thing, make sure that legislators see your programs. I mean, it's easy to cut a budget item when it's just a number. It's much harder to do when they see the people who are impacted by it, to see your dedication to the work that you're doing. And it really gives life to the program. So absolutely making sure the next 2 years that they actually come here, see your folks you work with, so that it's a real thing to them when they hear about it.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. To our viewers and of course to our panelists, we thank you for your leadership, your guidance, your advocacy over the past few months. It certainly was a long ride. And of course, it's not over. Continued conversations we'll always be having. Of course, AOF will always be around with updates. We'll be coming back in the fall with additional webinar and education opportunities, kind of as we dive in further to some of those changes in the budget. We're still processing and kind of parsing through some of those smaller issues that we saw and really what those longer term implications will be. So you can always follow us on social media. Make sure you connect with our webpage. And as always, all of our webinars are available to access on demand on our website, as well as those fantastic reviews and kind of slides from all of our presenters today. Really great resources and information included on those documents. So folks, really want to appreciate you one more time. Thanks for joining us along this journey. Sarah and I are so thankful to have your support and for being here as we go through the process time and time again. Certainly could not do it without this help and support of everyone on this call and those who are viewing. So folks, thanks again. We hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Have a great summer, and AOF will be back in the fall with more to share. Thanks again for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.